Welcome to the Cinnaire MSHDA 2020 Virtual Asset Management Conference. Thank you for your interest in our virtual sessions. We hope you enjoy Avoiding Deferred Maintenance.
All right, thank you for the opportunity to present. Continental Management is hosting Deferred Maintenance, and we appreciate the hard work of Mary and Maureen and all the other people that helped put this conference together. This is the 7th of the many sessions, 7 sessions that we've had, and we're the final. So, and we're going to be talking, as I said, about deferred maintenance. And just to give you an introduction, there are many reasons for an owner or agent to choose to not maintain their property. It may be a choice on the part of the owner or by necessity. Some possible reasons an owner may choose to defer maintenance and upkeep might include a lack of resources to pay for repairs, personal issues of the owner, environmental factors such as economy, weather, whatever, that may get out of their control. Whatever the reason, there's a cost involved because it will likely result in a loss of tenants and unanticipated turnover costs, more expensive repairs later, and costly staff turnover. It also may require premature replacement of key mechanical systems and inconvenience to our residents. It's generally assumed there's an imputed cost, like a compounding cost of deferred upkeep. In this session, we're going to explore some of the costs and methods to prevent the need to defer maintenance. And I have an incredible panel. I want to thank them first for being on the panel. That would include Josh Gina, VP of Cinnaire, overseeing asset management, Dustin Miller, RVP of KMG Prestige, and a fellow manager. Tony Martin, Director of Technical Services for Continental Management. Thank you, guys. Couldn't do this without you. We appreciate you. All right, so to start, we're going to ask each of our panelists to give maybe a 1 minute or less statement about what perspective they bring to this session. And so, Josh, I'm going to ask you to start.
Thanks, Gary. So, in our role as investor for most deals, we have an ownership seat, but we sit largely as the limited partner. When we look at the concept of deferred maintenance, we're really thinking about the long-term useful life of the asset itself. Wanting to make sure we have a long-term perspective over understanding how decisions today are going to impact our choices and the condition of the property down the line. So although there might be short-term reasons why we can't afford to make repairs today, we often want to be pushing towards a long-term perspective over how can we make decisions today that will best position the property for compliance over the entire tax credit period, but also position the property to be a healthy community for the residents beyond the initial tax credit compliance period. And the more we can be proactive in addressing issues and not allow deferred maintenance to build up, the better the housing will be over the long term and the better chance it will have to serve the residents to give them a healthy and safe place to live beyond the first 15 years of the tax credit compliance period. So from the investment perspective, we're really trying to push for a long-term view and understanding how short-term decisions today can best position the property to be a healthy place to live for the residents going forward.
Very cool. Thank you, Josh. Dustin, what do you bring to the table today?
I'm excited to talk today about the perspective of a manager as an agent, and discuss how we serve the residents and the owners jointly. Excited to talk today about deferred maintenance, but more importantly, how we can bring some preventative maintenance and bridge the gap so there's not surprises and concerns as we move forward.
And you're mostly excited to not be talking with a mask, right?
Very, very true.
Tony, what do you bring to the table on the technical services side? Tony, I think you have to unmute.
Yes, in my world and facilities, it's all about more of preventative and also being proactive on my standpoint. So in a way, deferred maintenance is almost like a bad word. You know, a lot of times I understand being in this management company for 14 years, construction for another dozen years. There are all, you know, I understand situations where a lot of times the funding isn't there, but my job is to go out, assess, make owners and third-party owners aware of their situations and what decisions they have to make moving forward, whether they need to come up with resources or they can wait to come up with resources.
All right. Well, thank you, panel, for being here today. We're going to start by talking about resources. Here we're talking about cash, liquidity, and replacement reserves. And Josh, this is right up your alley. So I'm going to put you right on the spot and ask you, why can't the owner fund the repairs and upkeep needed at these properties? What are some things that stand in the way of that?
Well, that's a good question, Gary. I would say that there isn't a deal that's underwritten to not perform. And so ideally, if the world works as it should in my head, which I think we'd all agree is the best way for the world to work, is that the deals are well capitalized, that they have liquidity, they're funding their replacement reserve, there's adequate cash flow. And so if a deal has all those things, we should have plenty of resources to address maintenance issues on the property. The reality is that doesn't happen, and that there are any number of properties that are suffering for a wide range of reasons that are short on cash. And so it comes to an issues of priority. And oftentimes when a property is short on cash on hand and their reserves are being pulled upon heavily, the owner is being forced to make decisions around priorities. And so what becomes important in this conversation is how they're understanding the need of the physical property to stack up when it comes to the priorities of the property. And it's easy to get sucked into a short-term perspective of seeing the bills that are due in the next 30 days and how much cash you have today. And it becomes a little easier to kick the can down the road because something is not staring you in the face. But I think as we'll talk about today, the reality is once you start to do that, your problems become much harder and the hole becomes that much deeper to climb out of. And so oftentimes, you know, when a property is short on the ability to handle its needs, it's going to be because something in operations isn't working the way it's supposed to be working. And so there's a lot of effort from my team and in the industry generally to try to correct operations. And that's really the driving reason for why asset management gets so involved when we see a property underperforming, is because without the necessary resources, the site's not going to have the ability to handle all the responsibilities and all the needs that it will have down the line to make sure the asset's properly maintained and well cared for over the tax credit compliance period.
Okay, Tony, what happens when there's not enough resources? What sort of actions do you have to take in the field to keep the system running?
As far as, you know, is to keep the system running, I mean, in my eyes, again, I repeat, preventative maintenance maximizes the value of our buildings. And it also, in our portfolio, and deferring maintenance just, you know, in my eyes means you're setting yourself up to waste your capital later. And a lot of times, you know, it comes with extreme costs. I mean, if we're deferring this and waiting, you know, kind of a run to fail mode, if you will, there's prices to pay, greater prices to pay in the future, whether it be emergency services after hours, temporary machinery, etc. The list can go on and on. So, you know, in my world, we try to come up with ways of maybe prolonging the life with a great preventative program, et cetera, to help with the lifespan of these components and these assets that we bring in for our residents and we keep and maintain. So we have resident retention as well.
So kind of what you're saying is you like to be proactive, not reactive. Dustin, you're caught in the middle and you're in that uncomfortable position. What is that like for you?
Yeah, it can certainly be frustrating, but I would say that, you know, in the example of us taking over a new property, we would do an assessment for that owner, let them know where they stand on their systems, their HVAC, their elevators, the condition of their roofs, major systems that could fail, and give them a good assessment of where they stand today. Owners don't like surprises. So, you know, making sure we actively communicate with that owner about where we stand, what the future looks like, what our current issues look like is our job. And then I would also say that owners are looking to us to give a status and some solutions. You know, we shouldn't just come to an owner and say, the HVAC system on the roof is broken. We need to come to them and say it's broken, and here's 3 options. We think we should do option C for the following reasons, and then let them chew on that. You know, generally when we build a consensus with the owner, we've been very successful at having them see it through our eyes and our lens. And we haven't had a big issue with that, but it can be problematic.
Great comments. Thank you, panel. I want to move on to staff retention and job satisfaction. And in this COVID-19 age, you know, we're finding it still very, very challenging to fill positions and find people wanting to come to work during this crazy environment. Josh, does the owner really get the frustration our employees feel when they're understaffed, under-resourced, and repairs have to be deferred because the resources are just not there? I mean, do you guys feel that? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think that we feel it. Do we really understand the amount of stress that it creates? Probably not, because if we did, the owner would probably be more responsive to not letting that stress build up, right? And so I think it speaks to what Dustin really laid out nicely, was the importance of how you're communicating with the owner. I wouldn't take for granted that the owner understands those elements, and helping connect the dots is a really important part of the job of management back to the owner. And you think about this concept of a feedback loop, where you need to provide the input to the owner so a decision gets made. And then if that decision didn't yield the right results, how management is then coming back to the owner saying, listen, we still have this issue. We tried this approach. It didn't get us where we need to be. We need to look at this, because if we don't, we're at risk of losing key staff members because the stress on that position is way too high. And helping an owner put all those pieces together adds a really important layer for the decision making. You know, I've had the fortune of working with both you and Dustin in our portfolio, and I can say that both of you guys do this very well. But I know I have had that specific conversation with Dustin on properties, where it's like, listen, we need to understand that this is a very hard site to run, and we have a very good staff right now. But we need to think about what we need to do to retain the staff. We need to think about pay. We need to think about compensation. We need to think about the maintenance that we're doing, and providing the right environment for them so that they're excited about being here, and we can keep them on site, because the success of the site is really tied to them and the work they do on the front lines. But it wasn't until Dustin really helped me draw those connections that I was able to kind of see the full picture. So I would say definitely don't take it for granted that the owner understands those elements, and the more direct you can draw those lines, the better results you're going to have in your decision-making process.
Dustin, it sounds like you're a bridge over troubled waters. I hate to use the cliche. How does that feel?
Yeah, it feels great. You know, it's about communication. You know, if I can jump into a story, So we've got a maintenance technician at a property who's been there 20 years, great technician, super versed in everything at the property, does a great job. But he's aging, and he has a knee issue and struggles to get around the property. Golf cart was the solution, increased his productivity by tenfold, being able to get to point A to point B faster than walking. We were able to ask the owner approved very quickly that expense, and that technician is more effective today because of it. So, it's about communication, it's about asking, and usually when we can help everybody see it from the other's perspective, it's a win-win.
Great comments. Tony, tell me how that frustrated employee might feel, and how do you help calm and address that situation?
Great comments from our other panel members. Obviously, communication is huge, right? And if we're not talking right down to the site levels, things can get really ugly and really quick, with a bad situation becoming worse. Because not only, do we have residents that might be without, major systems, this, that, or the other, with a, certain scenario, without the resources, things can get really frustrating. I've been on that end years ago for third-party owners where the resources weren't there. And literally on a daily basis, residents come up to you, ask you questions, and then the overall morale is out the window at that point. So, it's really tough when you don't have the resources, but you definitely have to keep communication and the positive there, because if you don't, things will go south, people will leave, and your problems will get greater.
Thank you. Unfortunately, in our line of work, outside threats are a way of life, or a major impact on our day-to-day. Things like natural disasters, economic downturn, crime issues, staffing issues. Josh, what influence, such as extreme weather, economic factors, crime, etc., do you feel that you're most in tune with that might destabilize the viability of a property? How do you watch for these outside factors in your line of work?
Yeah, well, it feels like the last 6 months have been nothing but this question. So feel uniquely prepared to respond to it. So we've had in Michigan a series of natural disasters relating to a dam break on the east side of the state, right? Flooding throughout the Midwest over the last several years. And so, we've had a series of natural disasters related to flooding that properties have had to respond to. In addition, right now, we're all facing economic downturn. Question of rent collection is front and center on everyone's mind in this industry right now. And as a result, there's a increased demand for information. So to me, there's two separate things. One, there's a natural disaster, which is really hard to prepare for. The best way to prepare for the natural disaster is to make sure the site is well resourced and not in disrepair to start with, right? And this question of deferred maintenance becomes more important. If the site's performing well and has good resources and is well capitalized, natural disaster can just be a temporary setback. If the property's underperforming and has other struggles due to poor performance, a natural disaster could be a tipping point to push a property into a downward spiral that becomes much more difficult to pull out of. And so from our perspective in asset management, one of the reasons we push so hard to monitor changing risk in operations for a property that might not be terrible is to prevent it from reaching a place where it's facing a downward spiral. I think a property's ability to respond to a natural disaster is very much tied to how successful the property is and how well the property is being run before that natural disaster. And that's the difference between it being a tipping point and a temporary challenge. When it comes to economic downturns and crime, it becomes a question of information gathering. trying to get as much information and data as we can to make whatever decisions we can and make the best decisions with the information that we have today. And so, one of the things that Cinnaire is working to do is to put out a survey of our properties to understand issues of job loss and income loss, trying to understand where residents are struggling, what properties are seeing changes to rent collection, not because we have immediate answers for it, but if we have a better understanding of the challenges that the sites are facing, the doors start to open in terms of how we can be a resource. And so the better information that we have from our partners, the more flexible we can be, and the better opportunity we're going to have to find resources that can make a meaningful impact for residents and sites that are struggling due to unexpected issues of economic downturn and crime.
Thanks, Josh. Dustin, in March and into April, we all closed our offices for several weeks, and then we opened on very limited basis, and that, of course, caused some deferral of maintenance. What has been the challenge to get things caught back up in your world?
Yeah, certainly a challenge, but also an opportunity. So, based on the fact that we can't get into units or haven't been able to get in units as much as we'd like, and maybe now on a limited basis at a number of properties, and we've taken the approach on a site-by-site basis of, what that risk looks like of being in units. It gives us an opportunity to do other things, right? Preventative maintenance is something we can certainly spend some time on. We'll have to spend more time in units in the future. So the time that we have now can be put to good use. Curb appeal, right? It's, outside social distancing. We can have the best curb appeal. We can have the best common area space, cleanest space, and then gear up towards units as we come back into, a post-COVID era, knock on wood.
Thank you, Dustin. Tony, from a maintenance standpoint, all these things have to be caught up. I know your team has jumped in to help some properties that have fallen behind. What are some of the major issues that the COVID-19 situation has created for your technical services department?
Well, Gary, as you know, COVID-19 is something that, it's crazy, this pandemic, to be honest. But when we first started, a lot of people, like everybody, were unsure. And there was some time lapse between people coming back, short-staffed sites, to where, like you mentioned, my team had to jump in and assist with daily activities like keeping the grounds clean, the common areas, until we found out more information about this. But as people started coming back, during this, pandemic, and that can go for even natural disasters, crime, we have to be there for our sites, and that's expected for emergency situations. And we also, are proud of our preventative systems and our points of contact in the event of an emergency, right, all the way up to the ownership. So, during this, we also had, situations like floods, mitigations, a bunch of other problems to where, we have to go in, stop the leaks. And also there's a dry up process before mold grows. Also, there's 72-hour window. So there's a lot of procedures, preventative, but altogether we work great as a team. And I recommend that every company has a great team atmosphere to jump in to where people aren't there. And also emergencies in place to where people can jump in when others aren't there as well.
Has safety of your staff, Tony, been a concern?
Absolutely. I mean, we take everything seriously. We follow the CDC guidelines. We're wearing the PPEs, but we're still getting the job done. Business has to go on like usual, even in the event of an emergency like this that no one's ever seen before. We still have to provide that quiet enjoyment and living for our residents, and we still have to take care of our properties. but we also have to be protective of ourselves with the PPE and make sure we're taking temperature checks and all the above to make sure we don't spread this thing also.
Thank you, Tony.
So,
I want to
Gary,
move on.
just one
Yeah,
quick
Josh?
follow-up. As Tony was sharing, it stands out to me that how much of the work that we have to do in order to be prepared for these events happens before the event occurs. Because if Tony doesn't have a team that trusts each other and the organization doesn't have a culture where employees feel supported, their ability to respond in crisis is going to be really limited. And it really drives home to me when you're leading a team and thinking about your organization, all the work you do to build a positive culture and build support and trust amongst each other. You do all that to pay in to the time when you have a crisis, right? And so that you have the structure to be able to respond and manage through a crisis. But if you haven't invested in your team up until that crisis, it becomes really hard to manage through it. And so I think Tony's spot on. And the more we think about how we invest in each other and our teams and departments in the run up to an emergency, I think is the biggest factor of how successful we're going to be in managing through that emergency.
Okay, that's a great segue into the next line of questioning, which has to do with rehab timing, modernization, functional obsolescence, and the life of components. We're in the 15-year tax credit world, and unfortunately, all of our components aren't aware of that. Roofs last 20 to 30 years, plumbing systems, 40 years. They all have different lives. Josh, in the 15-year world of tax credits, what are some of the hurdles that you come upon in closing deals out, resyndicating, keeping them alive for the 15-year investor obligation?
Sure. Yeah. This is becoming a really important question, Gary. In fact, the city of Detroit has its own standalone preservation initiative where it's, working very diligently to try to address issues of the preservation around affordable housing in the city of Detroit, because it has a tremendous inventory of tax credit deals that are exiting the compliance period. And so, we have this 15-year window and we have an extended use period beyond that. But clearly the properties are going to need investment after that 15-year period. The challenge is the demand for affordable housing outstrips the resources that we have to build it. And so the tax credit program itself, the 9% credits are competitive. And if a state wants to build new housing, it can't invest all of its 9% credits in renovating its existing housing. And so you reach this balancing act that every state has to strive to meet of the demand for creating new inventory while also renovating the existing inventory. And because the demand for new inventory is so great, a large part of the new tax credit awards go to deals that haven't already been constructed. To me, this really drives home the importance of this conversation around deferred maintenance. The more proactive we can be in managing the physical asset, the longer useful life we're going to have out of the residential units, and the better ability we're going to have to create safe and healthy communities for the residents who live there. Because it's very uncertain that at year 16, there's going to be this massive infusion of new equity. And so in order to prepare for that, and knowing that you're on a much longer time horizon, the more proactive you can be in thinking about how to manage the physical asset and keeping it in solid repair, and not, putting all your chips into a large recapitalization event in year 16, the more successful and more sustainable the property is going to be. So for me, it's all about the sustainability of the affordable housing inventory. The need for affordable housing continues to get higher, but we're going to have to figure out new ways to preserve the assets. And a lot of that's going to be by doing a better job of addressing deferred maintenance during the 15-year compliance period.
Dustin, 30 years of experience in this business, what keeps you up at night as major components of communities start to age? What worries you?
Yeah, major components, Gary, like elevators, HVAC systems, roofs, major leaks. I don't sleep well when the temperature drops to 10 below zero. Whenever we have a standpipe that leaks, it's always on the 15th floor, right? So those kind of major systems and our ability to respond to them and not be caught in a surprise situation, those are the kind of things that keep me up at night.
Tony, any helpful hints for our audience about how to increase the lifespan of the envelope of the buildings and that you've learned in your many years of experience? We might have you muted.
Sorry about that. Anyways, yes, there is quite a few things we can do to make the lifespans of any components last longer, especially with our building envelopes. I mean, there's signs that, you know, we can see, and then, you know, we got to make sure everything's sealed up properly and there's no moisture that can get into our buildings. That's our worst enemy, from the roof to, you know, our facade to our walls. It has to be sealed up tight. The same with mechanicals. I mean, there's plenty that we can do to prolong them. Condensers, cleaning coils, that's 90% of the problems, right? And if they aren't clean, we're burning up compressors, spending more money. Also, you know, furnaces, doing the tune-ups, you know, and doing all the proper preventative maintenance that I teach and am very passionate about, will actually give you a little longer lifespan. You know, typically mechanicals, they're 12 to 15 years, but I've had them last way longer than that, including appliances. You know, I use an example of a car, right? If you don't give it oil changes, if you don't, you know, give it the tune-ups that it needs, spark plugs, hoses, I mean, that thing is gonna, you know, live a premature life. So it's important, you know, preventative, to take care of these things and get a longer lifespan out of them.
And as we're resyndicating, as we're getting ready to renovate properties, we also need to look at the natural life of the components we're putting in and make sure that they're going to last the capitalization period as well. So good points. Thank you, guys. So moving on to marketing and retention. And Tony, I know you already mentioned about curb appeal, and I think Josh touched on it as well. Safety comes into play there too. We want to make sure our housing is safe and affordable. Josh, do owners care? Do owners focus on curb appeal, or are they more focused on other performance factors as being most critical? How do you see that?
Yes, and you know, I think that when I'm on site and walking a property, I have a tremendous focus on curb appeal, because to me, the curb appeal is a leading indicator of how much care the site staff and how much pride the site staff has in a property. And so, you know, when I walk a site and there's trash on the grounds, or the flowers haven't been replanted, or there's dead grass everywhere, to me, that's a first indication that we might have a team that's not taking pride of ownership in the place that they're working on a daily basis, right? And so, to me, the question of curb appeal is important, and it has a whole bunch of marketing implications. But for me, the biggest concern is if I have a site that is in disrepair, my immediate question goes to, you know, like, how are we allowed it to get this way? And are we taking the proper pride of ownership that we need to in putting our name on this product? You know, because when I think about performance factors that are really important to me, it's all the things that Tony talked about in terms of the building envelope and the things that Dustin touched on in terms of systems. Like I place a heavy premium on the condition of the roof, the facade, the mechanicals, all those things that could lead to catastrophic failure, right? You know, when we're looking at a deal on the front end, if we're renovating an existing project, you I press our underwriters and our business development team very hard on how we're recapitalizing the building structure and the systems to make sure we are prepared for another 15 to 20 years. So those are really important elements to me. But when I go to a site and I see a site that lacks the appropriate curb repeal, to me, it raises significant red flags and has me concerned about the potential for larger, more systemic issues.
Good points. Dustin, I know you got some hot buttons when you're visiting a site. What are some of those hot buttons when you're touring a property with the regional folks or the manager?
Yeah, just to say I agree wholeheartedly with Josh's points. It's not always about what we can't do. It's about what we can do. And, in the restaurant industry, the adage is time to lean, you have time to clean, right? It doesn't cost any money for us to pick up trash on a site. Pride of ownership, things that we can do. We've had some tough assets that had broken windows. We couldn't replace all the windows, but we could board up the windows and we could paint the boards the same color as the siding. Little things that we can do that are inexpensive to really improve curb appeal and to help bridge that gap as we move towards the next step.
Thank you, Dustin. Tony, do you want to add any of your hot buttons that you look for when you visit sites?
Oh God, Gary, me being a pretty OCD person, my eyes wander quite a bit. I am in total agreement with both of my panelists. Those are huge items, and it doesn't cost a lot, like Dustin said, to pick up the garbage every day, to pull the weeds. I mean, these are our residents. These are who we work for. And so, you have to take pride and you have to take ownership as if you were to own it yourself. And that's the type of staff that we look for. Someone that's going to be passionate about their properties and care, the overall care there for, our customers, the residents. So, when I go to a property, I'm just a big capital guy. So yes, of course I see the grounds, I see the weeds, but like Josh mentioned, I'm also looking at the bigger pictures to where, I'm looking at the envelopes, I'm looking at the roof, the shingles to see if they're curling, or if we're losing efficiencies or drafts in our buildings, or if people are caulking and putting the siding or doing the mortar repairs that might cause us bigger problems and more money down the road. And so I have a quite lengthy site checklist that I created when I do visit sites, and recommend to all the regionals and owners to use the same when they visit sites, to do a quick down and dirty checklist to see what they see. And we teach, that when people are doing grounds, hey, you look up from the ground and start looking at your buildings, because there's liabilities involved and everything else, and we have to make sure it's a safe, enjoyable place for our residents.
When we talk about retirement savings, we think of compounding. In other words, our interest earns interest on the principal. And unfortunately, with deferred maintenance, it's a negative compounding. And so, Josh, I want to segue into that and ask, what's been your experience over the long run if properties are allowed to deteriorate? And when do you feel like you have to jump in and intervene and maybe put it on the watch list?
Sure. Well, I think that if a property starts to deteriorate, pulling it out of that spiral becomes very difficult. And the quicker you can intervene and stop the bleeding, the more successful you're going to be in turning a property around. And so for us, we worked really hard over the past year or so to really focus on this concept of emerging risk and deals that aren't already on the watch list, but what is trending in the wrong direction and how can we intervene before it gets there. But the reality is we have any number of deals that have deteriorated, as you know, and that are on the watch list. And so when that happens, you get these compounding effects of no cash, no repairs, unit turn times take longer. The residents that are interested in the traffic that you get at the site is of a lower quality, less likely to pay rent on time. You get less rental income coming in. Your payables age from 30 to 60 to 90 to beyond 90. And you get in this really bad spot of things really building upon themselves and making it worse. For us, we become very concerned when that downward spiral starts to occur and the overall condition of the property degrades in a way that puts residents in danger. So it's one thing for a property to have negative cash flow and a poor coverage ratio, but for the owner to continue to make the repairs and seek to find solutions. And, you know, there are any number of deals on the watch list that aren't bad places to live. But once that tipping point occurs, you know, we have an obligation to act in protection of the residents and protection of the investors to make sure that the property is a healthy and safe place for people to be. And so that's the tipping point. It's not necessarily the numbers that give me concern and keep me up at night, but it's those places where the owner has kind of abdicated their responsibility of providing a safe place to work and live that forces our hand and requires us to act as the investor. Often by the time we step in, things are at a pretty tough spot, and we then bring in our partners and work really hard to turn things around, but that can be a very long process. And so we work as hard as we can to keep things from getting in that spot because the turnaround can be lengthy. But for us, when a deal becomes problematic and no longer is a safe place for people to work and live, you know, we're forced to act in a way that requires us to step in and take over that property, you know, and that is, you know, a reality of our industry.
Dustin, can you think of an example where waiting actually cost more money when we got around to addressing the repair, had the resources, et cetera? Any component that comes to mind on that?
Yeah, several. I'll give you a couple examples. So we're involved in a property, an asset that we took over, you know, mid-June kind of time frame. HVAC, it's a senior community, HVAC system went out, so no air conditioning in July. Really hot summer a few years ago, and the owner had to buy portable air conditioning units at, you know, $300 to $400 a piece in order to bridge the gap before the major replacement could happen. You know, that added 25 to 40% of the cost, and then lots of logistics in the meantime. You know, how to order all these portable AC units, how to get them installed, how to educate the residents how to use them, how to store them or dispose of them after the major replacement. So, you know, a great example of how preventative maintenance could have saved us from that major replacement, that major emergency.
Thanks. Great story. Tony, have you got any stories of neglect that resulted in a catastrophe or a really bad or a worsened situation because of the lack of resources?
Absolutely, Gary. I mean, over the last, I think, 14 years with Continental Management, you know, when you get the reputation to turn around properties, they keep on wanting you to take more and more on, not necessarily the nicest of properties. You know, I'm thinking of a few examples. One that comes to mind with some third-party owners, you know, troubles with the resources, a story where the previous management company didn't really do too much that I could see, right down to, you know, cleaning out the gutters to prevent water from building up against the buildings, creating foundation leaks, to patching flat roofs, asphalt shingled roofs improperly, causing a bigger issue, causing greater money and impact on the interior of the building, then just go ahead and doing it properly with a warranty, where we have that warranty, and now we don't have to deal, if we would have done that in the first place, we wouldn't have had to deal with mitigation, flood damage, you name it, the list goes on and on and on. So we're talking 6 figures probably just with this property I'm thinking of alone, that we've taken over management of for not very long, that we are going to spend a ton of money from deferred maintenance, because quite frankly, the communication might have not have been there. I don't know. But obviously the deferred maintenance and things got let go. Obviously, it's obvious when I show up on site, because I do a lot of the due diligence when we take over properties. And, it's obvious, I mean, you're not pulling any wool over my eyes when I pull up to the property and I see all these, I call them Band-Aids, that aren't proper repairs. And they're causing more greater harm because of somebody that didn't know what they were doing, that decided to take it upon themselves to repair it improperly, a non-industry standard repair, mind you, which could potentially void some warranties that maybe somebody didn't know about. So, yes, we've taken over a lot of properties with a lot of deferred maintenance, but I'm proud to say we turn them around, and, we try to put all our resources into it the best way we can.
I want to move into the concept of inspections and audits. Dustin, I think like myself, you probably have a love-hate relationship with capital needs assessments. Can you tell us how they impact your job and the assets you oversee?
Sure, I would just say that they're a good base. They're a good starting point, good reference for us. We should also utilize some of our key vendors to give us opinions. Just because the CNA says the roof is going to last 15 years or 20 years, maybe it'll last longer, maybe it won't. But we need to have other opinions and not just solely rely on the CNA. And then we, as operators, we shouldn't simply budget things to replace that the CNA says they need to be replaced when it says they need to be replaced, because we could get longer life as long as we're comfortable with taking that risk. There's going to be changes. Things are going to come up relative to that plan, and going to throw a wrench into that plan. And we got to use it as just a basic guide and not a Bible.
Tony, would you say that we should prepare for inspections and reacts and other things? Does that make sense to do that, or should we leave things as they are and give a true picture? What's your opinion on that?
No, I feel it's a reflection on us as a whole, as a company. There's never an inspection that we don't prepare for. I know there's other inspections that have more severities, which you can lose funding, for example, HUD, to where I hate to say that it might be a little more important than other inspections, but there's a lot more weighing consequences when it deals with those. There could be possibilities of losing funding. And to my eyes, preparing for an inspection is a big part of your company and your portfolio. That's like a grade sheet for doing new business. So when it reflects on you as a company and you do well in inspections, that just means more business down the road. That's your report card with your investors, your lenders. They're looking at this stuff. If you take care of your properties properly, if you're doing the preventative maintenance that you should be doing, and not going to a property and saying, oh, this deferred maintenance.
Josh, as an owner or institutional investor, do you put much weight on inspections?
Yes. Next question. No, I would say Absolutely. And I think both Dustin and Tony have covered it very, very nicely. The results of inspection, I 100% believe it serves as kind of a grade on the investment and care that's taken at a site, right? Like things like a REAC are an open book test, right? You know the answers, and it's how you prepare for it, right? And so I look at that as a question of competency and care, more than necessarily like a actual reflection of the physical asset itself. So when we get to things like the CNA, I really like how Dustin put it. I think it's a very useful starting place. It's a very good framework, but it is not gospel, right? It is not from the lips of God. It is the best guess, right? And we need to make sure we apply common sense at the site level to make decisions. But the CNA can be a very good tool, but it can't be the be all end all. We got to make smart decisions with the information that we have in hand today. But a part of that is knowing the CNA and using that as a resource to start from where we start to make decisions.
Hey, I'm going to come right back to you, Josh, and ask you about capital availability and about cost of credits, interest rates, tight credit market. We've lived through all these things. Is available credit and equity a factor in your ability to fund deferred maintenance when you have to? And can you give us any examples where you've had to think outside the box to handle deferred maintenance?
Yeah, I would say that the credit market isn't necessarily a factor in being able to fund deferred maintenance today. The credit market or the equity market is going to be a function of, what new deals can get done. But when we're looking at available resources, I would say that, we're really looking to understand how those resources are going to make long-term positive change, right? It's really hard to get on board with investing large sums of money for Band-Aids. And, when we're looking at the need to bring resources to the table to address physical issues, it's really important to understand how that investment is going to tie to the long-term sustainability of a property. We've looked at different scenarios where there's different loans to the property in partnership to cover these expenses, whether it's from a bank or the general partner or the investor. And so, there's typically ways to find resources, but what has to happen is there has to be trust amongst the stakeholders that those resources are going to be used in a smart way. And that gets to a lot of the things that Dustin and Tony have really laid out. The more the stakeholders trust each other, the easier it is to find resources. And I would suggest that if you're running into a spot where there are absolutely no resources, it can also be an issue that the stakeholders really aren't on the same page and don't trust each other in how those resources will be used. There are absolutely events where there's just no money left. Resources are finite. But on the whole, people can find a couple nickels to rub together for really important things, but it is a function of how much the people at the table trust each other to use those resources and what the plan will be to make sure those resources are going to provide for the long-term sustainability of the asset.
Yeah, we had a comment from the audience that that REAC is public information. It's published out there. It's on the internet, and that it's a label for us. And so just to add to what Tony said, it's critical to not have a failing score. And a lot of people go look at those when they're shopping agents and shopping investments. So those are good points. Thanks for bringing that up, audience. And the next item I wanted to cover was communication. And Josh, I think you just segued beautifully into that. I think what the theme here that you've been presenting in your part of this session is that communication between the various entities, between the Dustins of the world and the Tonys of the world, the site staff, and that we need to communicate and work together to prevent deferred maintenance. And then once we have it and it's identified, we have to work together to resolve it. And so I think we're all in consensus on that. I also wanted to touch on overcoming deferred maintenance, and there's no recipe for that. So every property is unique, and we have to work together to come up with a deferred maintenance strategy that is unique to the needs of that particular property and the components of that property. So I think this was all very valuable. I wanted to ask Mary to go ahead and run us through the slides so we can just take a quick look at some of the major components that really have a major influence on deferred maintenance. So Mary, can you advance our slides to the first one for us? All right, obviously this is a big one. Tony, why do we care about heating and air conditioning? Quickly, what is the thing we're looking for on this furnace?
All right, quickly, what are we looking for on this furnace? Obviously.
What could fail?
What's that?
What could fail?
A number of components can fail on this.
What can kill somebody?
Carbon monoxide from a cracked heat exchanger for sure.
Very good. Excellent. Next slide, please. Tony, this is one of your favorites right here. What's on the right there?
Oh, ice damming. Yes, our favorite. Yes. So there's ways to prevent that too, obviously, with heat tape and keeping your roofs clean and whatnot. So.
And of course, wind damage and the shingles unraveling. Of course, the next thing that happens is you get water inside the building. You can have problems with your neighbors. And in this case, our next slide shows a warehouse burning down that actually put fumes into a building, and we had to do a lot of cleaning up for that. So the building exterior ended up being cleaned, and the interior, because of this. Next slide. What's going on here, Tony? Is this a nice sculpture that these people have put up in their house? I'll bet they're in Florida.
Yeah. Well, it's either, well, I'm not telling, but I can say that they have a leak of some sort that's freezing. Yes.
And it's beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah,
Next slide. What kind of problems can you have with deferred maintenance with electrical?
Very dangerous, can cause a fire if not wired properly.
Or a shock, of course. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. All right. One more slide, I think we have. Yeah. I mean, all these things, safety, of course, is also a huge, we can't afford to have anybody injured, either a resident or otherwise. And there's a million things out there, slippery conditions, improper use of tools, flooding, and having a plan for all these things. And Josh alluded to this earlier, that the good agents really already have a plan before the emergency happens. And this can prevent deferred maintenance, and also can prevent elevated risk for a property. So very critical stuff. I think that we've covered a lot of material here. I want to thank Cinnaire for letting Continental chair this particular session. I want to thank my panel, who did just a great job of exploring these issues. Thanks to Mary and Maureen and the other people on the committee for putting this conference together. And Mary, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks for the opportunity here.
And Gary and Dustin and Tony and Josh, thank you guys so much for participating in the panel. And to the audience members as well. This has been a great session, very informative, and we appreciate Gary and Continental and Dustin and KMG and Josh from Cinnaire and Tony from Continental for joining us and helping us out with this subject. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you very much.